So, hey everyone, I'm Mika. I am a services designer actually in the tech industry right now at a company called Twilio. We make digital software products, but formerly have been, like Kelly said, a customer experience and service design consultant for Lifeline Animal Project and Austin Pets Alive. I got into that because I was doing my master's thesis at Georgia Tech and had a lot of time on my hands and started volunteering at Lifeline. I'm in Atlanta, so I'm really lucky to have Lifeline in my own backyard. And I just started nerding out about sheltering. I was like, had never met pit bulls before. I adopted my own dog at that time and was just like fully immersed. And I was thinking about what to do for my thesis. And so this really just kind of coincided, and I figured this was such a rich space. So I ended up doing my thesis on animal shelter technology, which is conversation for another day. But a side thing to that was I got really fascinated about design thinking tools and design thinking methods for the animal welfare space. So during my time at Tech, I actually had met Kelly and went to one of the Maddie's foster apprenticeships. She let me kind of like wing a workshop, and part of that is kind of some of this material too, because I was really interested in seeing if these tools would work for shelter staff and empowering people to problem solve. And then, like I said, brought that to some projects at Austin Pets Alive and Lifeline Animal Project, which I'll talk a little bit about too. So today we're just going to talk about what is service design. A lot of people don't know what it is or know other types of design, and what is journey mapping. I'll give some example work of projects that I've done, and then give you guys building blocks to start using this. And then I'll talk a little bit more, just some food for thought on where I think animal welfare could really use service design, and we can do some Q&A. I'm not quite sure how long this will take. Okay, so who is a designer? Can everyone just like, so I can see who's here, drop your roles in the chat, what all your titles are. Cool. Okay, so I'm guessing mostly leadership positions. Oh, cool. Foster volunteer coordinators. We have quite a spread from full-on executive directors to program managers, specific program managers. Awesome. Okay, perfect. Okay, so I think that everyone is a designer. If you're problem solving in your day-to-day, you're a designer. You're looking at what, designing programs, designing your organization, designing services that you provide the public, even designing the experience for your animals. These are all design problems. So sorry, my dog's gonna whine. What is service design? So service design is a small practice within the body of types of design that is specifically looking at orchestrating, aligning, and improving customer and employee experience across all touch points in the customer journey. So if you've heard of like UX design, UX is about the user experience of like a digital screen. This is actually zooming a little bit up, more about, if you say UX is like the 100-foot view, service design is more of the 1,000-foot view. So all of your touch points, from your branding, your signage, your emails, your notifications, how people sign up to volunteer, what the employee experience is, how all of this relates to your outcomes, all the programs and services you provide. All of these are touch points along, it doesn't have to be the customer, but along the journey for all the people involved in your ecosystem. Something I like to, a quote I really like about service design is, when you have two coffee shops right next to each other that sells the exact same coffee at the exact same price, service design is what makes you walk into one and not the other. This is like 80 to 90% the same as design thinking, if you've also had exposure to that or any training in design thinking methods too. There's a lot of terminology in design. It's all kind of the same. Okay, so what does this look like? This is, I'm biased because I'm in Atlanta, but I really love Delta. This is what I think like Delta puts a lot of customer experience front and center. And oh yeah.
Are you sharing your screen? I'm sorry. All of a sudden I was like,
oh, sorry. Yes. I thought I was, and I think I dropped out of it. Okay.
No worries.
Is that sharing?
Yes, it is now. Thank you.
Okay. Let me just go back for a second. Okay. Just for the recording. So Here's my little quote. And then here's some visuals. So these are some examples of like service design in the industry and how companies use service design. IKEA is a really great example, like walking into the IKEA store and all those different touch points that make that such a unique experience. Delta, I was saying, is one of, I think they put customer experience really at front and center of what makes them a really great airline. And then things, I put this Times Square one here because this is for different people, right? There's certain elements on the sign that are for people maybe in the disability community that need more of an accessibility type of signage versus people that might be colorblind. And that's the reason why they have different types of symbols and coloring and different things on here, because they're thinking about a lot of different people and demographics. So all of these things make up service design. And you might be wondering, why Kelly asked me to talk today and how this really relates to your jobs. And one of those tools in our tool set as service designers is journey mapping. Journey mapping is kind of the bread and butter. It's an artifact, it's a tool, but it's also a process. So I'll kind of talk through the benefits of that process in creating journey maps. But essentially what a journey map is a timeline-based visualization of the process that a person goes through in order to accomplish a goal. And this can be a map of a present process, a current state one, like your current process to sign up as a volunteer. Or it can be a process for in the future. So let's say you're exploring implementing some sort of rehoming pillar from Haas. You might be mapping out the future state journey to kind of explore what that would look like, where are the gaps, who's going to be supported, and things like that. So essentially the components of the journey map are the stages are kind of like your big spine. So it can be timeline based. It can also be asynchronous if you want to just kind of look at different categories of different processes. And then you have your personas that you have identified. So, and I'll talk about this a little bit more, but who are you designing for? And who are you going to walk through this journey with? And then you'll be mapping out the steps. So step by step, and you can get as granular or as broad as you want. But really like who are the people that are going to walk through this journey and what are they doing step by step through these different stages. And then below, you'll map, if you're really focused on your current state, you'll be mapping probably your pain points currently or your insights about human behavior in these processes and what's currently happening for each of these personas. And then, or if you're looking at future, you could look at the future states of different ideas or opportunities or solutions that could come in at different steps. And I'll put more concrete examples. And this can be done by, individually and by yourself if you're kind of thinking through something, thinking through a new process, trying to evaluate your customer experience or experience of your kennel staff or your volunteer community or the public. Or it can be done in a workshop, which I'll talk about too, really has its benefits with a kind of a collaborative environment. So uses, this sort of methodology can be used in a lot of different ways. So one is if you want to really empathize and improve your current experience. So that can be your public, your volunteers, your staff, or even your animals. For my thesis, I've made personas for animals and dogs in care and kind of looked at their journey through shelter and basically how they get advocated for. And then again, like I said, experimenting with new processes, or maybe you're evaluating a new software or system and you want to kind of think through this whole system of how it would work before you maybe sign on to the software contract, or just make sure that you're set up for success and thinking about who is going to be using that and empathizing with the people that would impact. Maybe you're thinking through different types of users, so different demographics of users. Maybe you have a really robust foster program, but you're in a highly dense community of Spanish speakers, and your robust foster program isn't accessible to them. Maybe you are in an area where you have a lot of seniors and your processes aren't as accessible to people that don't have access or aren't technologically savvy. So thinking through, maybe you have a set process, but thinking through these other like types of user groups that maybe haven't been historically supported by those programs. And then also lowering your risk by trying new things and stepping through the journey. So this is a way of kind of role playing or testing things out to mitigate that risk before you go and find these gaps in real life. Okay, so I'll give you some concrete examples. This is a journey map I created with Lifeline's Fulton County Animal Services location. This was actually fully collaborative, so we brought in the whole adoptions team. This is the polished journey, but I had them put post-its first, and we did very scrappy sticky notes and you know, your usual like design thinking workshop type of look and feel to it. But we just first ideated all the tasks they do. So this isn't a great example, I guess, from the stages to steps model, but I first just wanted them to ideate everything they do in a day. And so that's the gray, the tasks on the top. And then I had them ideate on all of the barriers. So what are the things that make this job hard? What are certain things that map to those tasks that get in the way, that delay themselves? And this is a really great way to also make your staff feel heard or make your peers feel heard. It's kind of like a therapy session. You just kind of get to put everything out there on a sticky note. But because it has structure, people feel safe to share their pain points and share and be really honest about what's challenging. So that was the barriers section. And then we looked at, so this is the staff's perspective, right? So I intentionally put in the blue line there for customer experience, which is to make sure that we're also putting ourselves in the potential adopters' shoes of what are the ramifications of these barriers. So, you know, because let's see, information and consistency on our end, what is the ramification of that on the customer experience end, and so on. We also looked at touch points, just since they're kind of, the adoption staff are kind of, you know, running all over the place from the office to the kennels to outside to helping people. Just kind of tracking where all these different steps are happening is good for that overall perspective. And then lastly, solutioning. So once we had all this down, we went back step by step through the journey map. And we're looking at different solutions responding directly to those barriers above. So let's say for information getting lost, we say, okay, what do you think would help this? And they would ideate, put their post-its down. And then we had a voting session, which is what the bold you see here is. So things that they thought we should prioritize after this session to really put into action to start doing some of these things. So that's just one example. And feel free to, let me open the chat too, if you have any questions. I'll mostly take questions at the end, but yeah, feel free to ask now. Okay, so I wanted to add this in here because you can modify the structure of the journey map to be less conventional. With my thesis, I was really looking at the data that we collect on different animals and how that leads to advocacy and ultimately live outcomes. So we were doing 2 placement workshops, a series of 2 workshops. First was focused on high-risk dog scenarios. So I actually worked with the staff to pre-pick 10 high-risk dog scenarios. So things like pregnant mama dog that's being protective of their pups and isn't safe in the shelter. So like, how do we get her out? What is the path to that? A behavior dog that's, you know, deteriorating in the shelter, things like this. So we had pre-selected these 10 high-risk scenarios, and we mapped the dog's journey through the shelter. So what are all the events that that animal experiences during the shelter? What is the data that we collect from those events? So behavioral traits, personality information, social media content, volunteers just getting to know them so that they can be advocates for them during this process. And then we also, if you can kind of see on the pictures, the stars are those key moments where something was done that said, hey, this dog needs to get out, or this dog needs help, otherwise it's urgent and might end up on the euthanasia list. So we were kind of tracking like what for each of these scenarios, what is that typical data collection and event pattern. So this is not your traditional journey that you'll see like, you know, used in industry or used by, you know, typical customer experience groups, but we modified it to really look at the journey of the animals and these high risk placements. And then, and sorry, by high risk, I mean high risk that they'll end up urgent, not high risk to the public. Second, the second thing we did was actually looking backwards. So the second way or angle we took at this was taking 10 different long stay or urgent dogs and mapping all the data we knew about them. So the first one was about generic scenarios like pregnant mama dog. This one was like a dog we actually knew named Maya. These are exactly the events, exactly the things that happened to her, the dates on them, and how the advocacy, the communication all worked around her and what her outcome was. So I would say the biggest learning for me from this specific workshop was not actually the content of the workshop. It was, like I said, that sort of therapy session, like how open everyone was to talking about these really difficult decisions around euthanasia and advocacy, and just giving people kind of a structured space to talk through this and feel heard, and for different departments of staff to really empathize with each other and see where their perspectives are coming from and how they're impacted by these decisions. Okay, and then a second or third one with Austin Pets Alive. And I wanted to show this specifically because journey maps can be as scrappy or as polished as you want them to. So this is obviously very scrappy, but I had the whole Austin Pets Alive, like adoptions and foster staff all in a mural board, which is a virtual whiteboarding tool. And we were looking at different use cases. So the one you're seeing here on the left is an adopter walking to the shelter. The dog would need these are like Austin Pets Alive specific terminology, but they need a medical consult, which is they might have a medical problem and they need to consult with medical staff before adopting that dog. And then they take that dog home and there's a bite in the home, and just kind of looking at that hypothetical scenario, what that journey looks like. As you can see, we actually had a mood line on this journey, which is something we didn't have in this one, but actually mapping these steps on kind of like the happy or the sad or frustrating level of that step. And you can really clearly see the experience of that adopter, like, you know, being really excited about taking the dog home, maybe waiting for the medical consult, or there's some confusing things in that process and your experience maybe starts to drop a little bit or get frustrating, but you know, you're so excited about taking the dog home. And then the dog comes into your home, you're super excited. And then maybe, you know, there's some sort of behavioral issue, there's a bite, and that drops off really quickly. So just really empathizing with these different scenarios. And then down here, the sort of pink things are different types of pain points. So again, you can modify these journey maps however fits your use case. So for this one specifically, we had 3 buckets of types of pain points. These were 3 themes that we had established we really wanted to focus on. So we have right here, sorry it's small, but one row that are pain points around communication, pain points around resources, I believe, and then pain points around technology. So for each of those steps, mapping out what are the pain points for that step that might potentially show up for this adopter that's going to affect their experience. Yeah, and then from this work, I guess just to close the loop, we ideated on some things around these pain points, and the adoption and foster staff did some prioritizing and actioning, and yeah, everyone kind of took ownership of a few actions that they wanted to put into place. Up here, I guess just to talk about it, we actually started with an empathy exercise. So these are 4 different, this is a different workshop. This was actually looking at the dog care side of the program, but just to note, it's really important to make sure that you know who you're designing for and not making assumptions. So, you know, if you're designing for your care techs, your kennel techs, maybe even inviting them into the room and saying, hey, like, what do you feel? How are your days going? What are your challenges? And actually having them directly contribute in real time to these maps is really helpful to make sure you're starting off with really sound data that's coming straight from the source. Okay. Okay, so maybe I'll stop for questions since we're kind of in the middle, but so some benefits that you might have seen from what I've just shown are, you know, problem solving with some structure around it, identifying gaps and opportunities in a really strategic way, unifying and aligning teams, giving them a space to put their anything they want down on a post-it note and let them be really heard. Centering your problem solving and your processes around human-centered thinking. So being empathetic. I think there's a lot of emotional charge in animal welfare sometimes. So it's easy to make assumptions. It's easy to be frustrated, like, oh, why would a foster refuse to crate their dog the second they bring them home? Like, why would the public not understand that, you know, we're slammed and we're under-resourced? But it's really easy to be in that mindset because it's a really emotionally charged environment, and that's totally understandable. But I think this gives you guys tools to really be empathetic of why they might have those assumptions, or why it's easy to, you know, bring home a dog and be excited and not crate them, and things like that. It is a way to be really strategic and iterative about solutioning. It allows people, like I said, to feel and be heard. And then it also gives you a big picture horizon to keep coming back to. So your journey can be as granular or as big picture as you want. But if it's more of like a big picture, you know, maybe you're implementing a whole HOS pillar, or your 1 year out goals, keep coming back to it and kind of seeing, okay, which steps have we improved on and which steps are we still struggling with, or it's still providing a bad experience. And a lot of these things, just to know, you know, are simple human problem solving. They're things we do every day, but service design and journey mapping kind of creates that structure around it that really helps kind of formalize it. Okay, before I kind of get into the step-by-step of how you guys can do journey mapping on your own, I'll maybe just stop for Q&A about that portion and like any of the things I showed or projects that I was involved with. Happy to take any questions. And that's so great to hear that you're still using those maps from Austin Pets Alive.
I have a question, if I could
Sure.
ask. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm Julie. I'm Julie Lani Chang. I saw that you were doing 2 different journey map for your high risk and your long stay urgent dogs. Were you able to identify anything unique associated with the 2 different scenarios? Like, is there something in your journey map with a high risk dog that is definitely different from the life-saving gap one?
Yeah. And this was like circa 2017, so it was a while ago, but if I remember correctly, one of my biggest takeaways was, so okay, to give some background, we were doing this at Fulton County, which is a municipal shelter. They're working with a really, really old shelter. So they're co-housing tons and tons of dogs. Like most of the kennels are co-housing. And it's a shelter built for, I think they say 80 dogs, and they house 400. So they're putting like a lot of dogs co-housed together, which leads to, you know, a lot of the dogs that ended up on the urgent list were dogs that were just not great for that type of housing, getting into fights. And the only way we can keep it safe is to get them on the OSHA list and get them out. So what I learned was a lot of it was just chance. Like it's so much up to chance, like who a volunteer sees on their shift walking through the kennel that they take out, and they get to know and they advocate for that dog and that dog gets out. So a lot of what my thesis was on, this is more about the shelter technology side, was like, how do we create more streamlined and open channels for volunteers to see what dogs need to get advocated for or don't have any information on, so that we can create those grounds for advocacy. And then second, what was the second? Oh, just creating more open like data sources so that volunteers have access to that, and that they can, as much as they can, put any information at all that they learn about these animals. Same with the kennel staff as well. So yeah, that was something. It was just kind of like, oh, this dog is like, let's see. Like, I don't know if you can see, or if I can tell. There's some where like the data is really short, and that was just by chance. Like this dog didn't have many touch points from humans on it because there's just probability, and like this dog has the exact same behavior profile, same behavioral challenges, but maybe they're in a front shoreline kennel and that staff or the volunteer, like they caught their eye and they were working with that dog specifically. So just looking more about how do we balance out that advocacy, I think was a big one. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Thank you.
That was a lot. Yeah. Any other questions?
Really interesting.
Okay, cool. I'll keep going. So, and I hope all this makes
Oh,
sense.
I just, I also want to say that mood line is
yeah,
really cool. I think that's amazing. I love that.
yeah. I love that journey maps let you have that. So you have like the whole big picture line. You can see everything they're going through, and you can drill down into specific points, and really like get into the meat of why that's happening.
Yeah.
Okay, so the building blocks of journey mapping. First, you want to establish who. So who are you designing for? Again, like I was saying, which groups of people, and this completely depends, like where you are on your planning, where you are on what processes you're trying to implement, but some probing questions maybe help you figure out who you should be journey mapping around. Is which groups of people may your current processes not support, and are you taking accessibility into account? And also, maybe you think like what your placement coordinators are going through, but bringing them into the room and seeing like truly what they say are their daily pain points and their daily frustrations might also help you answer this question too. So you never know, but yeah, walk in their shoes, avoid assumptions as much as possible, bring people into the room, and try not to build these by yourselves, but you can do that too. Okay. Second is identify the steps. So what is the scope? Are you looking at, just implementing a new like free food bank for pet owners? Are you looking to just modify certain digital touch points on your foster program? What is the end-to-end stages of the process you're trying to work on? And then establish what those stages are, and then establish what the steps are under those. So it should be 2 levels of a hierarchy there. From those answers to the first question about what your scope is, you can identify which rows you'll need. So more often than not, you'll always need pain points. It's always a good idea to start with pain points, even if you think you know what they are. But also, are you also looking to ideate? Do you want an opportunities line? Do you want that mood line that I was showing earlier? Sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's not. Do you want to look at all the touch points that this is happening across, or all the different, pieces of software that information is stored across, or pieces of communication that foster parents are getting reached out on? And then KPIs, which steps are you wanting to track, and which metrics can you use to track those steps? So kind of just establishing your x-axis and your y-axis By this part, I don't mean to actually fill this out. I just mean identify what you want to map. Okay, pain points and insight gathering. So you have to kind of put on your qualitative researcher hat on for a little bit and really get to know your customer's perspective. And again, that can be your staff, your animals, your volunteers, your foster, your whole community. There's different ways to do this. There's a thing called a service safari, which is kind of like role playing, or you can actually like go through the process. When's the last time have you signed up for your own foster program? When's the last time have you signed up for your own volunteer program? Just kind of see what it's like, what it feels like. How hard is it to find your vet clinic resources? How hard is it to find your rehoming resources? You can also put surveys in, make sure that there are open opportunities for whoever you're looking at to provide feedback and be open to the feedback. And then you can also interview people. You can, ask your trustee volunteers to come in and just talk for a little bit about what's going on, your foster parents, about their experience with their last animal, things like that. Then ideas and solutioning. I really encourage people to root your ideation in pain points. So don't just ideate for the sake of ideating. Go back to your pain points and say, okay, for this pain point, what ideas do we have to solve that? And then seek multiple perspectives. Pull in your animal control officers, pull in your volunteers. Like it's really good to kind of round out ideas, depending on the scope or what type of process or project you're looking at. And then revisit the journey. The journey is not supposed to be, and it can be, but not always, a static artifact. It can be a living document where you're constantly updating it depending on, how the pilot launch of that process goes or how your quarter goes. And then looking back at that and identifying those metrics and KPIs to keep tracking. And then keep iterating. So I'll let the video play for a sec. Yeah. And I think Kelly, I showed the same video back in Pima.
I think you did. I love it.
Yeah.
Yep, get it. Come on, you can do it.
He's thinking.
Yep.
There we go. So
it's amazing.
Keep trying. Keep trying different ways. Just because you try one program, one process, and it doesn't work out that first time doesn't mean that it's not going to work. That's that revisiting. Go back to your journey map, figure out what worked, what didn't work, what parts are actually getting better, what new problems did it create, and keep that as a live document to keep looking at how you can continually iterate and improve on it. And also on a more meta level, keep iterating on your journey mapping process, like what parts didn't work, what parts did your staff groan at or not want to be participating in, and don't get too discouraged by that. Just keep iterating on working on the journey maps as well too. And keep asking yourself those questions, like what's working, what's not working, and that journey, that mood line to Julie's point, really is a good visual of that, to see where your highs are and where your lows are. And I really like if you do that type of journey map to compare those two shapes. So maybe it's like before you launch a certain program, what's that mood line? After you launch the program, what's that mood line, and how do those shapes compare? Okay, so some tools. You can really do this with anything. There's lots of whiteboarding tools out there. There's Google Jamboard, which I think is free, Miro and Mural, which are very similar names and very similar tools. You can even do it with PowerPoint or Google Slides if you don't want to get into the whiteboarding tools. You can do it in Excel. I've seen, full journey maps built out in Excel where you make the rows, each row for the pain points, opportunities, and you can color code your cells and stuff like that. And Google Sheets and Google Slides are obviously really nice because they're collaborative. You can just do it on pen, paper, and sticky notes. And I invite you guys to try this out, like maybe just 10 to 15 minutes in an opener of a staff meeting, like a really rough journey map of looking at your foster process and what does everyone think the pain points are. You can collaborate with your team in different ways. And it's a really, really good tool, like I said, to make people feel heard. Okay, I'm going to pause there. I guess we'll have these 3 different sections. Any questions about that? How to actually use this, put it into practice?
I have a question again.
Go ahead. Yeah, no problem.
Okay. So how do you define your pain points? Those are like setback? Is that what it is?
Yeah, pain points are any challenges that people
Challenge.
are having. I'm wondering if I can. These pictures are big enough to show you concrete examples. Okay, so if you can bring people into the process that are actually, like, let's say you want to look at your foster process, if you could actually bring foster parents into the room, they would be defining your pain points. So you'd be asking, strategically going through a journey. Don't say like, give me all your pain points at once. Let's say like, okay, signing up for a foster program, what pain points do you feel like we had? When you want to take a new animal, what pain points are there? When you have that animal in your home, do you feel supported? What types of pain points are there around decompression and acclimating that animal? What pain points do you feel like, or are we not supporting you enough during finding the adopter? So kind of strategically asking them step by step through this journey about what they're experiencing. If you don't have access to people to tell you these pain points straight from the source, I'm sure there's also, we're also our own volunteers and foster parents and things like that. So I'm sure there's some self-report that you can also do that is happening or that is a big challenge. I just wanted to show some concrete examples from the adoptions journey map. So like, let's see, like matchmaking, vague notes. They don't have a private area to talk to adopters and have like quieter conversations, kind of like yelling at each other in the kennel, language barriers, things like that. So these are all things that the adoption staff doing their jobs were having some trouble with.
Okay. The other question I have is that going back to that mood line that you have, which I really, really love. How did you decided what goes under the line and what goes over the line? Is it just people reporting how they feel, kind of like the language that they use? I'm very frustrated. So then if that's the case, then you put it under the mood line, or they said, oh, I'm ecstatic. And so you put it above the mood line.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. In this case, the Austin Pets Alive adoption and foster teams were doing that. So they're like, okay, I'm hearing the most. I feel like they're the most. So this isn't actually 100% ideal. Like ideal, you would get your adopters and your foster parents in, but it's still, they still are experiencing this every day and they know what's happening. So they were self-reporting, like, okay, we know that they get the most frustrated when they're waiting for the medical consult and stuff like that.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. I'll take more questions at the end. So just some food for thought, some areas that I think are interesting and that I've seen, especially with Haas, creating certain services and then actually like thinking through those services and how they affect people and how we can make them as smooth as possible. So I have 6 different scenarios, but these are just ideas where you guys can start and you can start working through these with your different programs. So let's say Jesse and Taylor walk into a shelter. They're looking for a new dog. They have no kids, no other animals. They're a perfect unicorn home. They have this avenues to work with certain behaviors, and they are open to adopting an adult bully breed, but they walk out with a puppy because they were in the easiest cage to access and none of the staff was available. Maybe a lot of the staff called out sick that day and everyone was really strapped. So no one was able to help them or provide any suggestions of dogs that are, adult dogs, more high risk. And so, they picked the puppy, fell in love with the puppy, they walked out with the puppy. So just looking at like what ways can we seize opportunities with people that we can seize opportunities with. And again, looking at the journey and how you can push certain metrics is a really great way to do that. Another example, a community member falls on hard times and is trying to rehome their dog. They aren't sure what resources they have available to them. They go to their shelter. They tell them to try to rehome themselves. And they give them resources to do that on social media, but they get bombarded online by a bunch of people shaming them. Their post gets too much negative attention. They feel defeated. Their time runs out and they have to make a hard decision to surrender that dog to the shelter. So like, that's an example where the rehoming resources are in place, but I see this all the time, people getting, shamed for it and feeling really defeated, trying to do the right thing. So, just posing a question like, how might we smooth out that process? How might we, and part of that is like a bigger systemic like education of the public, right? But just kind of identifying like, how can we make that a more gentle process for them? Kayla decides she wants to spend her evenings volunteering. She makes a decision based off of which has the earliest orientation. She starts her first shift and feels overwhelmed. There's a dog she wants to take out, but she's intimidated. She gets discouraged and stops going. So, how can you heighten your volunteer retention? Riley is a kennel tech and is having a hard time because they don't feel like they can directly influence the outcomes of their favorite dogs. They're an endless resource of knowledge on behaviors, but there's no easy streamlined place for them to put this information. This kind of back to what I was talking about with that Lifeline example of my thesis. And when adopters ask them for help, they're usually in the middle of something. So how do we create more spaces for Riley to advocate for dogs? Sorry, two more. Cynthia is an older woman that lives on government assistance. She's not technically savvy, but her son can sometimes help her with her phone. Her cat Poppy needs medical assistance. She doesn't have transportation. And how does she know what resources are available? So kind of thinking through Cynthia's journey. And then lastly, Meredith is a new foster parent. She takes the dog home for the first time. She's overwhelmed by all the resources. She meets a potential family online, but isn't sure how the adoption process goes, what she should be doing, what the adoption team should be doing. The process takes too long and the family finds another dog. So these are all things that are happening, all the time. Not to say that there are programs that are really great and, flip side with cases where there are positive things, but just like certain gaps in places in our organizations, processes, and systems that we can kind of think through these hypothetical scenarios and see where we can kind of catch or build safety nets to fill in these gaps. Cool, that's all I have. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm always available. Happy to answer any questions.